start recording as well. And we can get started. Okay, so welcome everyone to CS196 lecture 11, I believe. Yeah, 11. Yeah, because we started with a 0. I'll make sure it's starting up well before I start getting... Yep, it looks like there's no issues on my end. If there are, again, I'm recording, and so worst case, we can just rely on that. So last lecture, we discussed HTML and CSS and kind of a lot of the intricacies in that. And today we're going to be talking about JavaScript. This is going to be our second of 2 front-end lectures. After this, Matt will be teaching 2 lectures on debugging and regex, and then we'll come back to me the week after teaching backend, and then after that, databases. So this is going to be our second lecture on front end. We're going to be talking about JavaScript, and we'll go ahead and get started. This one, I should be taking it slower. I know last time we kind of had to hurry, or I did hurry, even though we probably didn't need to. So, objectives for today, as I mentioned, kind of an introduction to JavaScript, and then tied in closely with JavaScript, this thing called the DOM, the Document Object Model. And then near the end of the JavaScript stuff, we'll start to talk about event listeners. And then from there, we'll do an example, and then we'll start to talk about frameworks, libraries, and packages, and kind of using them in JavaScript. I'm going to be trying something a little bit new today, so we're going to be going a little bit more on the kind of applied side of things, and so I'll be kind of sharing my screen as I, look for these different frameworks, plug these different frameworks in, and do some live coding as well. Hopefully all goes well there. I tested it beforehand and there weren't any technical issues, but I imagine that there will be because there always is. So we'll go ahead and get started with some review. So if you remember from yesterday, we split front-end development into 3 major categories. That is what the website says, how the website looks, and what the website does. And on Tuesday, we discussed these first 2, what the website says and how the website looks, those being HTML and CSS. And then today we're going to be talking about what the website does, and that's JavaScript, of course. So let's review a little bit about that. What the website says is HTML. HTML uses tags to create elements. Content goes in the tags, and then tags can have attributes. And so there's a ton of important tags that you can use at different times. Some of the really important ones that I'll mention are HTML tags, which encompass everything, the head tag, which is for the head, and then the body tag, which is for the body. Additionally, we use div and span a lot just to kind of have arbitrary divisions that we can apply CSS to more easily. And there's, of course, tons and tons more. There's an important difference that I didn't mention last lecture that I'll bring up this time, which is the reason why we don't always want to use div and span is because search engines and search engine optimization does rely on you using H1 tags, H2 tags, stuff like that. And so it makes your site a little bit more accessible as well. Screen readers work off of a similar software than search engine browsers, and so those 2 things do rely on you sometimes using some more semantic HTML tags. Additionally, we talked about how the website looks, and that's CSS. Of course, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Again, there was one thing we didn't touch too much on. If you do want to learn more about CSS, learn what the C stands for, the cascading. There's a property in CSS called the cascade, which determines if you set, the background color of a certain element to red and then later to blue, which one of those takes priority. And essentially, there's 3 things that determine it. There's a flag called important that just overrides everything. There's the specificity of it, and so, if you assign the ID to have a certain background versus just all tags of that type, the ID will kind of take over, and then if those 2 things are equal, whichever one is listed second. And getting some practice with that is pretty important if you plan on writing a lot of CSS. Of course, CSS uses the selectors and the property value pairs. We learned about the difference between internal and external CSS. And some important selectors, with an extra T there, my mistake, include, tag names, so just div, h2 in body, stuff like that. And one thing to note here is, yeah, you can apply it to the entire body. You can select classes by prefacing it with a period and do .className. And then you can do element IDs, the IDs of an element, by prefacing it with a £. So we'll get started with a little bit of a quiz here. Which of these four things does not go in the head section of an HTML document? Pollbot should be up. There it is. So go ahead and react to that. Again, this is for attendance, so if you're here, always good to participate. Which of these do not go in the head section of an HTML document? The title tags, style tags for internal, external CSS, the page content, or the page metadata? Which of these does not go in the head section? And of course, the head section is the one that's before the body, the direct child of the HTML tags itself. So I'll wait just a little bit for people to respond. Okay, I'll give probably 10 more seconds here. Okay, and in 3, 2, 1. Okay, pretty good split of results here. The majority of people put 3, which is correct, the page content. Some other people put 2. Again, the style tags do generally go inside the head. Some people put 1 and 4. 1 is a little bit of a tricky one. The title tags, while it is, you can argue something that the user sees kind of up here in the tag, we do not count it as content itself. And so that actually does go down in the body. And then page metadata, of course, that is stuff about the page, and that's always going to go in the head. So 3 was correct there. Great work, everybody. So let's go ahead and get started with the kind of meat and bones of this lecture, which is JavaScript. I'll refer to this sometimes as JS, sometimes as JavaScript. They're the same thing, just know. One quick confusion, JavaScript is really not that similar to Java. I know you all are probably learning Java in 125 as well. The syntax is somewhat similar, but in terms of how these things are run, they're very different languages, I would say. The syntax is similar though, so it should be easy to pick up. JavaScript is a programming language. It runs in your browser and on pretty much every web page that exists because it needs to determine what the web page should do. JavaScript is a tool that we use to do a huge portion of modern web development. And JavaScript can be used for front-end or back-end development. For our purposes, we're going to be focusing our discussion on front-end. And then eventually when we cover back-end, 2 weeks from now, or a little bit under 2 weeks from now, then we'll be talking about that in Python. Of course, maybe modern web development is more so in JavaScript, but you can do it in either, and they're equally valid. And really, the approaches are very similar. So how do we run JavaScript? Well, there's 3 ways to run JavaScript. If we compare this to something like Python or something like Java, we can just type in our console Python myfile.py, or for Java, these compilers will have their Java runtime environments. For JavaScript, it's a little bit different, but not totally. There's 3 main ways. The first one is including it into an HTML file, and then when you load that HTML page, the JavaScript will be run. The second way is running it directly in the console of your browser. And then the third way is through a shell with a runtime environment. The main shell that people use is Node, and so you would say node myfile.js, but primarily we're going to be using the top 2. And just to give a quick example of this, make sure you all can see, what I can do here is do Control-Shift-I, which is the shortcut for the development console here. And we can see, this here is a place where I can write JavaScript. So I can say, int or var I equals 0, I plus equals 1, and we'll see that we can say console.log, which is the print statement, console.log I, and it's 1. As well as, tons of errors from Google's side because this is a complex website and these things happen. So mainly we're going to be using the top two. I think most of our discussion today will be by including it in an HTML file, but it's equally valid to run it in the console. You just, every time you refresh, sometimes you can lose that. So let's discuss including it into an HTML file. Once again, there's two major ways: internal and external, linking the JavaScript into your HTML page. And once again, there's the third way, technically called inline. Kind of with the same deal with doing inline CSS. Please don't do it. There's the reason why web development. There's a pattern that you follow in web development of keeping the HTML to be what the page says, keeping the CSS to be how the page looks, and keeping the JavaScript to be what the page does. And when you write inline code, which is essentially writing JavaScript or CSS in the lines of the HTML file, you kind of break that principle, and it becomes a lot harder to figure out what can go wrong, and it can be a lot harder to, have your code be modular and easy to continue developing. So try not to do inline. There are cases where it's appropriate, especially for JavaScript, more so than CSS, but I would say generally try to avoid it. So first we'll discuss internal JavaScript. When in the past, when we wanted to write CSS in our HTML file, we used our style tags. Now, similarly, we're going to be using script tags. Script tags can actually go in the head or in the body. If you're importing some other library, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, or doing some sort of setup that does not touch the page directly, you want to put it in the head. And otherwise, you want to put it in the bottom, usually. The only reason for this is, if you put it in the head and it references something about the web page, sometimes that can error out because the web page actually hasn't technically loaded yet. But if you put it at the bottom of body, that only gets processed after the web page has rendered. And so it can improve some functionality that way. Additionally, if you have something that's kind of prohibitively slow and you put it in the head, it will try to run that JavaScript before it renders the page, and so that can lead to a bad user experience. And so we'll look at a quick example here. We have our HTML tags and then our head tags. We link our style sheet just like this for the CSS. And then for the, again, internal JavaScript, we'll just do two script tags and write JavaScript inside. Again, we mentioned this console.log is how you do print statements. So nothing too surprising about that, I hope. Additionally, we can put this at the bottom of the body, and an example of that is here. Note, you don't put it outside the body, just put it at the bottom. Both of those, again, are equally valid, and whoops. And if we look here on the web page, our little demo page we were using, we can open up the console once again, and we can see that these got printed. One little fun debugging fact, even though you're debugging lectures next week, is if you're ever debugging JavaScript, where it got printed from is always here on the right, which is pretty handy. So, other than internal JavaScript, we can use external JavaScript. This is very similar. Instead of, writing actual JavaScript inside the script tags, you just give the script tags a source. And so what we'll do here is say script src demo.js. Again, this is an attribute of the script tag. And then we'll open this demo.js file here, and we can see our console.log. This is how you do print statements now in an external file. And again, those two work exactly the same. If I were to open this back up, you'd see that print statement. Nothing too crazy there. So let's have some quick discussion. Oh, whoopsies. Let's have some quick discussion on the DOM. The DOM is this thing that stands for the Document Object Model. The DOM is a tree of elements that make up the HTML page. And so let's look at this graphic for a little bit and just get some terminology in there. So first, you have this thing called the document, and you have the kind of root HTML element. From there, we have the head and the body, and then inside the body, we have, many, many things. In our case, many divs. In this example case, this person has an A tag that has the text mylink and the attribute, an href attribute. Additionally, they have an h1 tag with the text myHeader. Now, we can actually figure out exactly how this HTML page looks based on this DOM, just because of how these two things are laid out, right? We know that the A tag is outside of the, outside of the h1 tag. They're on the same level. I worded that a little bit like it sounds like the h1 tag is. inside A, but they're at the same level, and we call those siblings or children of the body element. I'll be using that terminology now and then, so it's good to just get a little bit familiar with it. So these are children of the body element, and they're siblings to one another. You can compare that to something over here. We'll look at these title tags. If the title tag were to, I don't even think you can put other elements in the title tag, but if it were to have one, that would be a child of the title tag, which is a child of the head tag, which is a sibling to the body tag, and a child of the HTML tags. So I hope that makes sense. We're going to be using that terminology a little bit as we go on. So by interacting with the DOM, JavaScript has the ability to add, remove, and edit HTML elements, add, remove, and edit HTML attributes. We can change CSS styles. We can react to HTML events, and we can even create HTML events. Anytime you interact with the document, you probably want to preface the JavaScript command with document. Document is an object, hence the document object model. And so if we remember to our Python 3 lecture, we can access attributes of that object by using dot. And so just a quick example of that is there's 3 functions that are in the document object, and we can use these 3 functions. Well, there's many more than 3, but we're going to be looking at these 3 for now, or at first, I should say. We can use these 3 to locate elements on the HTML page, and then we can go and work with those elements from there. And those 3 functions, or at least 3 primary ones that we're going to be talking about, is document.getElement by ID, document.getElements by tag name, and document.getElements by class name. Note the getElement by ID is singular because you can only ever have one tag or one tag with a specific ID. While these 2 are plural, of course, we can have many divs or we can have many things with a certain class name. Great. So let's give a quick example. So we'll start with this here. This is, again, just from the stuff that we did on Tuesday. We have a div with the ID name here, and in that we have my name, William Eustis. What we'll do is we'll just print out document.getElement by ID name. And again, because there's only one thing with the ID name, then JavaScript is going to be able to find this element and return it to us. And we'll just look at what it is. And we can see, oh, that's in the way. We can see that it's actually the raw text of that element itself. So we really do get div ID name William Eustis. Now, one thing I will note is internally in JavaScript, this is, still an object, and so you can still mess with it. It's not literally a string. That's just how it gets printed out. What's important is that that's the object that we're working with, that and only that. So we can look at another example. We can say document.getElements by tag name div. And so this is going to give us all of our divs in the web page. And that's exactly what it'll give us. It'll give us basically an array of 10 divs. And those divs are the 10 divs that we have in order: top block, profile picture, header, name, bio, resume, bottom block, project wrapper, project 1, project 2. And each of these are elements that we can then work with additionally. And one thing you may note is they have this nice little naming convention. Ooh, there's a question. Would there be an error message if there are multiple IDs with name? I think technically, okay, so this is like a little bit of a weird case because HTML, again, isn't a programming language. So nothing's going to stop you from making 2 things have name. But if you run it through an HTML style checker, it'll yell at you and say, don't have multiple things with the same ID. Additionally, I imagine, I'm not actually sure the behavior that you would get if you did document.getElement by ID and multiple things had the same ID, but I'm sure it wouldn't be good. Either JavaScript would error out or it would just give you the first, neither of which is necessarily going to be a good thing. Good question. In general, though, don't do that, even by accident if you can avoid it. So we can see the nice naming convention here where it's going to be, the tag name and then pound the ID name and then dot the class name if that exists, right? And this lets us, understand, hey, here's a div tag, ID equals project 1, class equals project. Just a little bit more understanding of that. This format of writing things we'll talk about a lot and we'll use, especially in the back end when we talk about templating. And then lastly, we'll look at classes. And so we'll use getElements by class name. We can see our 2 classes here with the project class. And additionally, it just returns us a list, but of those 2 items only. So nothing too crazy there. Hopefully that's not too surprising. Yep, of course. Great. So we've located an element. So let's learn how. Okay, I forget my headset turns off every now and then. We've located an element, so let's now learn how to edit them. We can learn about the three major functions being element.innerHTML, element.attribute, and element.style.property. Now, if it's in italics here, that means that's not literally the text that you put. It is just an example, with the exception of style. I actually can't tell if that's italics or not. It looks like it, but it shouldn't be. So for element.innerHTML, we can first select our object, and so we can say document.getElement by ID name. And this, again, will return the element that we're trying to work with, and so we'll call this name div equals document.getElement by ID name. And then, using this first example, inner HTML, we could directly edit the inner HTML of this div. And so right now, the inner HTML says William Eustis, and we'll instead change it just to say Eustis. And when we view the page, we can see that that was functional on page load. We can even add other elements inside of this. So we really are kind of editing this as a raw string. And so we can do the same thing, get the element, but instead we can change it to Eustis I. Can anyone tell me what the I tags do? Google is your friend. Italics, exactly. And are they inline or are they block? We briefly discussed the difference. Yep, inline, exactly. So it's not going to create a new line afterwards. And so we can kind of just directly apply this to text. And sure enough, it works perfectly, right? No issues here. So life is good. Next, let's talk about element.attribute. We can edit attributes on our images. So, right here we have our image tag with the source profile picture.jpg or pfp.jpg. And instead, we'll change it to document. We'll first, of course, as always, get the element, and then change the src to be profile picture alt.png. And I made it, because there was so much excitement about the Eustis drawing yesterday, I went ahead and made that the new one for this lecture. So, we can see it works wonderfully. There is some issues because the images are different sizes, and so we probably need to write a little bit better CSS to rein that in and not push other things around. But it does replace the image, and that's kind of what's important. And then we'll also talk about element.style.property. And as we briefly discussed, we can add or edit or remove styles. And so we'll look at this project wrapper class. At first, we have the background color F5, 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 which is just kind of an off-white. And then what we're going to do is first get that element. And then we'll say name div, which is just what we're calling it, dot style, accessing the CSS attributes of this, dot background color equals orange. Now, can anyone tell me an interesting distinction on how this is a little bit different than CSS? See if anyone picks it up. It's a little bit hard to see. So compare the kind of CSS thing that we're changing with the JavaScript thing that we're changing. There is one notable difference that can lead to a lot of bugs if you don't catch it. The attribute names are different, exactly. Hex versus English, that's true. The hex versus English is true, but CSS supports both. I just couldn't find a name for F5, 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 so I put it. That is an important distinguishment, but that's not what we're talking about. The important thing is that this one is background hyphen color, and this one is background capital C color. It's camel cased, right? And so just a quick note with these, on pretty much every CSS attribute that's going to be using this hyphen, that's not really allowed all the time because it's a minus sign in JavaScript, and so instead we drop the hyphen and turn it into a camel case. Oh, is it really? Huh, I didn't know it had a name. So yeah, just keep that in mind. It can cause a lot of bugs if you don't catch it, but usually it'll throw you an error if you try to use this in JavaScript. Additionally, if you try to use this in CSS, it can cause some errors because it doesn't exist. Great. Well, we're not limited necessarily to editing existing things. We can add, remove, and move around our own elements. And so we'll talk about 3 functions that do that. First, document.createElement. In document.createElement, we basically just put the raw HTML as the parameter to the function. In this case, we just use the tag. Sorry, this should say the raw tag, I guess. And so we say document.createElementDiv. So we just kind of put that name div. And then document.innerHTML look at me, right? And so what we have here is a div that has the text look at me. But when we load the page, we can't see it. It's not there. And so what's the problem? Well, we haven't actually added it to the page yet. And so that's where we use this thing called append child. And there's this terminology of nodes. A node is just a distinct, A node is just any element or the HTML document itself, basically. There's a little bit more complexity to it, but it really isn't that complex. And so what we'll do here is we'll say my element equals document.createElementDiv, creating a new element. We'll set the inner HTML to be look at me, and then we'll get the body from the document. You can do document.body, and in fact, it's very handy to do that instead of, dot get element by tag name body index 0. And then we'll append my element as a child. And again, if we think back to the DOM, appending as a child just means you're placing it kind of inside of that, right? So if we had nested divs, for example, each layer you go in is a child of the layer it's inside. And then finally, we'll discuss document.removeElement. And so this is how, as you may be able to imagine, we remove elements and everything inside of them. And so we'll find document.getElementById bottom block that had our projects, if you remember, and we will remove that from the document. Again, note here that we do have to kind of get the correct location here. If I did, maybe document.removeChild, this would fail because my element, the bottom block element, is not a child of the document. It's a child of the body, and it's a sibling of the top block. I guess you could call it a grandchild of the document, maybe. Okay, so we've now been able to edit things, add things, find things, but we've only been able to do these things on page load. And so, this JavaScript executes when we load the page, and then it basically never executes again. But this really does not have to be the case. And we have this amazing thing called element.addEventListener. And this element.addEventListener will kind of do what it says. It will add a listener for an event. And you will specify an event. And when that event occurs, a function will be executed. And so let's look at what this looks like in some more detail. And so first of all, let's look at some events. Events, you pass it in as just a string like click, mouse over, or key press. And then function is a function. And we'll look at an example of that. So let's say I want to get my profile picture to change when someone clicks on it. So let's kind of talk about the first steps of those. First, we need to get the element of my profile picture. Then we need to add an event listener to that. And then finally, we need to call a function that toggles the image. Okay, so first we'll document.getElementById image. This is the ID of the image, so no worries about that. Is hover in CSS an event listener as well? That starts to get into like WebKit stuff, I believe, or WebKit adjacent stuff. So that's not necessarily something we're going to be covering. I believe hover in CSS does use JavaScript though. Modern CSS uses JavaScript for a lot of things, which turns it to be Turing complete, as we kind of mentioned previously. So HTML and CSS together can do any kind of arbitrary calculation because CSS now has like math in it. Good question. So we'll document.getElementById image. Next, we'll say add event listener, click, change image. And then we'll look at this change image function kind of one piece at a time. If this source includes profilepicture.jpg, change it to be profilepicture.alt.png, else this .source equals profilepicture.jpg. Well, what is this? We were saying this. What is this? This, and oh man, terminology in this explanation is going to be a little bit hard because I will use the word this probably more than I should. But the keyword this is something that JavaScript uses generally to refer to whatever is important at that time. And so, generally speaking, if I say this outside of this, I'm trying not to use that word except for the keyword. If I say this in kind of the main body of the JavaScript here, it will refer to the document. If we use this in the function that an event listener calls, then this is going to refer to the element that that event listener is applied to. Now, you may ask, what happens if we just call change image without applying it to the event listener or without this event happening? Well, then this won't refer to this element, of course. This will refer to something else. It changes every now and then, so I can't tell you for sure what it is. This, the keyword this, is one of those things that's a little bit complex in JavaScript. And when in doubt, of course, Google it. So what we're doing is this dot source dot includes. Includes is in fact just a string function, and so there's nothing crazy going on there. This dot source will return us a string because we're basically saying document dot get element by ID image dot source. One important distinction that I want to make before we move on is why don't we put parentheses here? In line 9 at the end, when we give it change image, what would happen if we put parentheses here, or what would why don't we put parentheses there? Kind of both of those things. And if you are wondering what I mean by putting parentheses there, I mean kind of in line 1 where we have open close parentheses, and maybe we would pass parameters in there too. Uh-oh. My thing is fine. Is my mic messing up? It does not say that I'm dropping frames. I'll wait just one moment for this. Not anymore? Okay. Wow, cool, I guess. I love it when stuff like that happens. I hope it wasn't too bad. Was it super loud? Do I need to go back and edit that out? Headphone warning style? No, sound like the audio roboto Eustis. Just the feds trying to get me. Yeah, you know. Okay, so why wouldn't we put parentheses here by this change image? Well, what that would do is it would actually call that function, right? We just want to pass this function object in. We don't want to actually call the function. So if you do call the function here, if you do put those parentheses, what's actually going to happen is it will return whatever value it returns. And in this case, that's nothing. It's undefined because we don't return anything from this function. And that's what event listener will try to call when we click on this image. And if you think back again, we kind of briefly mentioned this stuff in Python 3. There was this magic function underscore underscore call underscore underscore that defined the behavior of when you put parentheses next to something. And so this is kind of similar to that, as these things are all just objects in the end. Okay, so let's have a quick quiz. What does this line do? I will first make the quiz, which is probably important. Okay, so if you go to Polbot, you should see the quiz. There we go. So go ahead and just react to one of those. What does this line do? URL equals CS196 illinois.edu. I'll tell you there's no tricks in that first line. I just wanted to save some space, and so I made a variable equal to it. Maybe technically I should say like let URL or var URL, which is kind of the equivalent of int or string in Java's case, but it's not always necessary. So does this make all the anchor tags go to the CS196 website? Does this make the first anchor tag go to the 196 website? The last anchor tag go to the 196 website? Or does it do nothing? Did I write this incorrectly and I messed up somewhere? So I will wait just a minute or so for this. In the meantime, brainstorm some things that we may be able to do to our website in JavaScript. We'll kind of discuss some of those. So what would be some cool features we could add to our website? And really here, the sky is the limit. Press a button to go to dark mode. I like that. I like the dark mode discussion. Bringing it back up from yesterday. What else are we thinking? I'll give probably 30 more seconds on this poll here. I saw some people were still reacting, so. Let's get some more ideas flowing in for what we should do with the website, because we will be doing something to the website very soon. So I'll close a button for job recruiters to send you a job offer. That's good. I'll go ahead and close the poll now. So get your answers in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so it looks like the majority of people put 2, so it makes the first anchor tag go to the CS196 website. That's correct. So, when we call document.getElements by tag name A, this will give us a list of all of the A tag names kind of in order of how they appear in the HTML document. We're going to grab the first of those, and then we're going to change the href attribute to be equal to URL, which is just this string up there. Again, there were no tricks in that URL part, so. Some people put that it was written incorrectly. It's not, so that shouldn't be an issue. And then one person put that it makes all of the anchor tags go to the 196 website. No, because we take the 0 index here, it would only be the first one. And in fact, if you did want to make all of them, you would actually have to make a for loop and kind of do them all one by one. So just some notes there to keep in mind. A button that launches a Eustis themed minigame, Eustis Man, a button that turns you into Eustis for 10 seconds. Just enough time. What would that be? What would a button that turns you into Eustis be? Or maybe what would the Eustis themed minigame be? And so, yeah, let's actually do one of these live. We're doing it live. And so what I will do is I will grab let's see if I don't mess this up. Uh-oh, I'm messing it up. I need to grab this. Okay, so let's kind of do this live. Tic-tac-toe, but with emotes. Pac-Man. Let's see. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit of me juggling back and forth between these two windows, but we will test it out. So let's go like this. Okay. So let's do let's do a dark mode. I did like the dark mode idea. And so let's look at our website. What should we change with dark mode? Well, we'd want to change the text color. We'd want to change the background color, of course, and maybe we want to change the background color of these as well, right? When do we want this to occur? Well, we'll make maybe a little bit of a button for it, right? So let's do that. Where do we want our button? Let's just put the button at the bottom. Make it easy, right? So at the bottom of body here, before the script, we'll make a div, and we'll give the ID equals button, and we'll say, click me, right? We could do an actual button here, but I think it's a little bit more fun to just do this. And the limitation that I'm going to put on us is we're not writing any CSS for this button. We're only going to do this for the JavaScript, and the rest we're going to write in JavaScript. And so let's do the first thing, which is just get our button. So button equals document.getElement by ID, then the ID, which is button. Great. So now we have the button. Let's actually make our button kind of look like something, because right now it's just going to be an empty div. So we'll say button.style.width equals, we'll say maybe 10 pixels. Let's do a little bit more, 50 pixels. Button.style.height equals 50 pixels. We'll just look at how that looks. And then additionally, we'll throw in there button.style.background color equals, what color should we have the background, do we think? Let's do orange. Let's do Illini orange. So let's see, what is our color? E8 for something something. So we'll smack that in there. And then someone mentioned to put a drop shadow, so we'll say button.style. Let's check. Actually, we'll, for the sake of time, kind of go a little bit faster here. Great, so let's look at what this looks like just from this. We'll refresh our page. We have a nice button that says click me. Now we need to call a function. So first, we'll write a quick function, click. We'll just call it, and then we'll say document dot add event listener. Oh, sorry. Forgot the document element by ID. Actually, we can just say button. We already got it. We want this to happen on a click. And then we want to call the click function. Click clack. In this click function, what do we want to do? Well, let's do this. Let's break this into pieces, shall we? Let's just make the background color of the top block different. So document.getElementById top block .style .background color equals I don't know any good dark colors. I think midnight is one. So let's just test that part. Okay, midnight is not one. Instead, we'll just do let's do like 303030. Not a hex code. So we'll look at what this looks like. Refresh. Oop, okay. Let's do some quick troubleshooting, see why this isn't working. So we look into our body, our top block. We can see it is actually getting applied, but there's just no large background for the top block. We should probably apply this directly to the profile picture header. Well, most importantly is the header. So instead we'll change this to be header. Refresh. Click. Great. Okay. Let's also change the text color, shall we? Copy this line. What is the... Pretty sure it's text color, right? Oh, it's just color. And we'll change this to be the off-white that we were using before, so we'll just say F0, F0, F0. Refresh, click. Nice. Yeah, you guys can't see the code that I'm writing. Thank you for reminding me. You guys are so good at this. Ah, man. Okay, and so for the sake of time, I actually think that we might stay with what we are at right now. But let's break down the code because I wasn't sharing my screen the entire time. My bad. So first we have document.getElementById button, and again, that just grabs this button that we made down here, right? Next, we make the width and height 50 pixels because I think that looks nice, and we make the background color Illini orange. Next, in terms of the JavaScript perspective, we add this event listener with this click function, and we write the click function right here to apply a background color to this item and a background color or a color to this item. I wish we had a little bit more time and we could kind of do this in more detail. Unfortunately, I've taken this lecture too slow now compared to last, and so we'll get back to the lecture now and I'll wrap up. But really, kind of those combinations of events is a huge part of modern JavaScript development. But front-end development is a really broad field, and so it might be easy to make a simple web page like we saw. It can be a lot more work to make a web page like Google Slides, for example. If we just look into here, we can see there's a huge amount of JavaScript pages being linked and a huge amount of HTML and CSS being applied. We'll just click on one element here, and you can see all of this CSS being applied to it, right? So there's a lot going on, and sometimes it can be some more work. But luckily, we don't actually have to do all of that ourselves. Modern programming relies on the shoulders of giants. And so we can really rely on other people's. Yeah, that's my bad. I got it in the end, though. That's what's important, right? So, using other people's code is a huge part of that. And so what we're going to do is just look at some few examples of different HTML and CSS and JavaScript frameworks that you can use in modern website development. And so first, we'll look at this thing called Bootstrap, if any of you know it. Bootstrap is, as it kind of said in the little bio there, a CSS, HTML, and JavaScript library. And what you can do is import Bootstrap, and it has pre-written themes and pre-written kind of code that you can just import into your site. And so we'll just look at an example. We'll say Bootstrap portfolio, right? And we'll look at one of these. And so all of these, these people, instead of having to write all this CSS and all this HTML by hand, you do it at a much higher level, and you can get a beautiful looking site like this from it, right? And then of course, because it's we live in a awesome time, all of this is open source for free, and so we can open up the HTML page here, and we have all of this stuff available to us, right? And so instead of writing all of this by hand, all you have to say is I need a section, and I want to apply this CSS to it, right? And then Bootstrap has written a lot of the CSS for page, section, portfolio before, or maybe this person has written it. But in either case, you can do it. Yeah, sure. Use Bootstrap for your homework. Go for it. I encourage it. Really the goal of these lectures is for you all to get experience with website development. So doing modern website development is a great way to do that. We have three fun ones here. These are just CSS libraries. Personally, I use Semantic UI a lot. And so all you have to do with Semantic UI is kind of include it into your page. And so you include the CSS from their site, as well as some JavaScript that does animations and things like that. And then from there, you have access to kind of, much easier coding. So let's say you want to make an advertisement, if the page will load. This is so sad. How's my stream? Stream's fine. Okay, so we'll do containers, I guess, since that's the one that loaded. Wow, this is not working with me right now. All right, we'll look at headers. So they have their custom fonts, custom text sizes for headers, and additionally they have some extra stuff with it, and so we can see subheaders, things like this. And as always, you can always open up the HTML. So, if you wanted to make cool looking things like this with your own profile and, header, subheader, this is all you have to do and say, UI horizontal list. I want to make an item with a mini circular image. And then obviously you're going to provide your own image. And then for the content, we want subheader with the name, coordinator, right? And so it really does simplify this a lot for you. Instead of having to, write all of this CSS by hand and going through trial and error, you can just, use all this. Yeah, watch, CSS, parallax, snippet, right? And this is, really something great, and I do suggest you all do it, right? So here's, a quick example. We have the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript for the cool parallax effect. Right? I guess this one's kind of a vertical parallax, which is a little bit interesting. But we can see, oh wow, it's almost, probably is 3D to be honest. Yeah, so they use 3.js, I believe, which is a 3D library. We can look at another one here. Maybe, maybe not. Not really sure how to scroll on this one. Oh, you scroll down. Yeah. So, tons of cool effects and stuff like that. And of course, just get it online. People have written this code. We want to make cool looking stuff. So, yeah. And then the last thing I want to touch on here is boilerplates. When in doubt, Google XYZ boilerplate. So, portfolio, boilerplate. And all that means is it's going to be a good, kind of template for you to work off of to make whatever you want. And so in this case, we have this nice developer portfolio boilerplate code, and you would fill this in with your own information and links, of course. But it has all this stuff kind of for free and easy to use, and it looks nice, and you don't have to worry too much about it. So I really do encourage all of you to use modern website development practices like writing with other people's code, because that's the world we live in. I mean, that's how we That's how we write good code nowadays. Of course, as always, I should mention this. Cite them. If you're using other people's code, check the license out. Make sure that you're actually good to use it. Make sure usually you'll have to either credit them or include the same license in it. But yeah, usually it's pretty straightforward and saves you a lot of time and makes your sites look more pretty. So yeah. All right. Well, that is lecture, everybody. This is our second and last lecture on front-end development. We talked about JavaScript. We talked about HTML and CSS on Tuesday. I hope you all find it really interesting. It may not seem like it. These two lectures maybe weren't huge in terms of content compared to entire courses, but you actually have the ability to do really crazy stuff in front end development already, right? You have the ability to change your page to look like whatever you want, make it look like whatever you want, and have it change kind of on the fly because of JavaScript events, and of course have any content you want. So you can really write pretty solid websites with just the information that we've learned right now. So yeah, thank you all for coming by. Next week, again, Matt is lecturing on debugging and on regex. Those are going to be some really great lectures, especially the debugging one. It's super important. And so I hope you all, or I guess I'll see you all then. Bye-bye.